I'm standing next to a statue of Lieutenant Colonel Robert Dukinfield. He's a big deal round here, and he's in front of Dukinfield Town Hall, which you can see behind it. Very grand building. Now the point is that you look at Dukinfield on a map and you think, well, that's part of Ashton-under-Lyne, and then you see it's in the borough of Thameside. But what I've come to understand is that Dukinfield has a very strong identity of its own. In fact, Thameside, the borough that Dukinfield is in, was only put together in the 1970s, and up until then all the towns that made up Thameside in the end had their own strong identity, their strong traditions, and they still do. And from that time they had their own civil governance as well, hence Dukinfield Town Hall. Dukinfield's in the northwest of England, close to Manchester. It's part of Greater Manchester, and within that it's part of the metropolitan borough of Thameside, which you can see in the red border on the eastern or right hand side of the map as you look at it. There's Dukinfield in between Ashton-under-Lyne, Droylsden, Hyde, Stalybridge and Mosley. Now these towns may be part of the same borough within Greater Manchester, but Ashton-under-Lyne and Droylsden are historically Lancashire, whereas Stalybridge, Hyde and Dukinfield are part of Cheshire. But they're not within present-day Cheshire Council boundaries. These exclude part of historic Cheshire, but there they are, part of Cheshire proper. Dukinfield's in that knobbly bit, northeast right side of the map. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Dukinfield, who we see here, he's not just a big deal for the town of Dukinfield, he's a big deal at Old Chapel. And I'm on my way to see Dawn Buckle, the historian at Old Chapel, Dukinfield, and she's going to tell me something about how Robert Dukinfield is connected to the founding of Old Chapel. And we're talking about how this chapel came to be, and it's a story that goes back many centuries, even to 1662, and the aftermath of the Reformation and the Civil War and stuff like that. So tell me, how did Dukinfield Old Chapel emerge from there? Right,
well, this area of the country was very much Cromwellian.
Right.
So in the Civil War, the local Lord of the Manor, Robert Dukinfield, Colonel Robert Dukinfield, because he was an important member of Cromwell's army and did something fantastic apparently in the Isle of Man. So he was already here and had established in his own chapel a couple of miles away, a congregation which became Congregationalist.
Okay.
So
that's
we've
Old
already,
Hall Chapel.
That's Old Hall Chapel. Yes. Because of that, I think other people were drawn to this area. Plus the fact that the minister of the church in Denton, which is now St Lawrence's, was ejected in 1662.
Right, let's just say a bit about what that was. 1662, what happened?
Well, Charles II was restored to the throne, and the rules became much tighter as to what you could believe and how you could believe it, and clergy had to sign up to it, and a lot of clergy didn't want to and were rejected.
So all the non-conformist congregations, denominations, the Congregationalists, the Presbyterians and Proto-Unitarians, they couldn't sign that.
No, exactly.
So it was a turbulent time religiously, and that's when non-conformity begins, and that's really what this chapel comes out of.
That's right, exactly. And part of that was the fact that John Angier at Denton was there, and he had a nephew who was part of this turbulence.
So John Angier, he was a dissenter.
Yes, he was a dissenting minister who kept his chapel, his church, because his congregation wanted to keep it.
He had them on side.
So he had them on side, so he never left in 1662.
Okay.
But what he did do was to help his nephew to find somewhere in this area
So
where he could preach.
His nephew is Samuel Angier.
Yeah.
Now I've been looking at David Dole's book,
Yeah.
and it says that Samuel, he was of a mind with his uncle, really.
Yes.
He wasn't going to sign up to the creed that everyone had to in 1662, and he started preaching in his own house.
That's right. Yes, he did. In somewhere like 1672, we think, and maybe a bit earlier. It's hard to say, but he certainly had a house in where we think it is Yew Lane, which is a little way from here, but nevertheless it was there. They, like many congregations at the time, they met in a barn.
Yeah.
So that it could easily be converted into a workplace.
Now, why was that?
Okay.
Why would you want to do that?
Because of the laws of the land at the time. I don't know how strict they were, but certainly they were. And even when the Act of Indulgence came in 1672, there were still problems for dissenters.
There's a few chapels today that are still in that style, aren't they?
Oh, yes.
So they have the pulpit in the middle.
Yeah.
It's sort of spread out sideways,
right, yeah.
so they can pretend they're just storing hay.
Yeah.
if the local law comes back.
Well, certainly, and obviously our first chapel was built like that.
Yeah.
So our first chapel, which was opened in 1707, was built exactly like that.
Because people look at this building and it's in a rather Gothic style.
Absolutely.
And that could mislead them.
Yes.
About just how far its roots go.
Yeah, it looks like the parish church, doesn't it?
It does a bit, doesn't it?
It's very dominant.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, its
town.
position as well, and because the chapel and the congregation precedes this building. That's important to say.
Absolutely,
isn't it?
absolutely. Yeah.
So Samuel Angier is. Am I pronouncing his name right? Angier. He's preaching in his own house near here. He must have had some charisma, some sort of following, and Robert Dukinfield becomes part of his congregation. Now that's significant. Why?
Yes. Well, because the Dukinfields owned all the land around here, and they gave this place where we are sitting just now. Yeah. They gave this area of their land to the congregation because of Samuel Angier's charisma, as you say.
Yeah. So when Samuel meets Robert, and Robert is convinced by this guy, that's hugely significant, isn't it?
Yes, and continues to be so for a number of years, because the Dukinfields moved and built their hall in a different place where the present cemetery is. So they were very close to the chapel then, and in fact the gateway that we have in the chapel yard was a special gateway for them to come to chapel. It was one of the specifications of giving the land, was that they would have a separate entrance.
They would come in separately. No one else would go in.
No, that's right. That's right. They just came up the lane and in through the gate and into chapel. And of course the door was at the side as well. So
they build the chapel and they start in 1707.
It opened in 1707, yes. But obviously the congregation were already here.
Yeah, ready-made
and also the
congregation.
other thing we have to remember is that Dukinfield was a tiny rural community at that time as well. Not, it changed completely during the Victorian period.
Well, it did, and we'll come to that later.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, you mentioned it's a tiny rural community, but I'm looking at some statistics of the local chapels and the numbers in them. Dean Row, Wilmslow had 1,309 members. Chester had 1,000 members. I think they rounded it up there. And it says including 30 gentry.
Yes.
Now that's interesting, isn't it? So there was a bit of a class division
all
there,
the time, and yes.
But even so, lots of ordinary folk came. And then number 3 in the county is Old Chapel, Dukinfield, with 793 adherents. 14 of whom were gentry. And at the time, Cross Street in Manchester had 1,515 members, and Chowben had 1,064.
Mm-hmm.
Extraordinary times.
I tell you, North West England was amazing, fervent in its dissent.
Fervent, yeah, there was a fervour of dissent, wasn't there?
Definitely.
Samuel Angier ministered from 1639 to 1713. In 1714 he was succeeded by William Buckley. He must have been doing something right, given the extraordinarily high numbers attending Old Chapel at this time. He was a local man and a formidable character. It was said of him, if he shook his stick at Hall Green, the boys trembled as far as the town lane end. William Buckley is buried near Samuel Angier, to the left of the chapel.
It's just so enormous and so wrong in lots of. It's so this memorial to John, so wrong in many ways, but I think it just indicates the power of industry in this area, really, because he's the grandfather of Beatrix Potter, the famous children's author, and supporter of the National Trust in the Lake District. He was a very rich and powerful man in his time, having boats that went across the Atlantic bringing cotton and back and forth, and it was known. He was the Richard Branson of his age, or somebody like that. You know, he was equal that kind of figure.
So if we look at the other graves, yes, in they're all
same
all
kind
sort
of period,
same level, and then we come round
simple
to
slabs
and then there's this
of the workers and the huge mausoleum of the boss.
There's no escaping the fact that benefactors have been hugely important to Old Chapel, from the beginning, in fact, and continuing into the 20th century.
O God, without whose fostering aid, in vain man's fairest schemes are laid. With grace our humble works surround, and make this truly hallowed ground.
Here may thy children gratefully raise, through distant years their song of praise, and meet a blessing from above, in holier trust and purer love.
Here may the truths which Jesus gave, beam forth in all their power to save, and kindle up that radiant faith, which brightens life and shines in death.
Here in communion full and sweet, may rich and poor together meet, as brothers all and equal heirs of that bright world the Lord prepares.
Here may that love breathe unconfined, which feels for all of humankind, which yearns with deep desire to bless, and break each chain of wretchedness.
Here may the thoughts of worldly care lie hushed beneath the power of prayer, and troubling grief grow calm and still, submissive to thy perfect will.
Dawn, we're in the graveyard at Old Chapel, and over the fence is the crematorium, Dukinfield crematorium, and then we've got the graveyard here, and there's a lot of graves.
Yes, which just sort of makes you realise the number of people who were members here over the years. I mean, we agreed a little while ago not to open any new graves, so there won't be any more graves here. But when you look around, it just confirms the fact that this was a very important centre for people in Dukinfield. to worship at here.
It was. I'm seeing some fresh flowers over there.
Yes, yes.
And I suppose this makes the point that there'll be a lot of families in the area who have relatives buried
Yes,
here.
exactly. And I mean, some people still think that they are, this is their family church, if you like.
Yeah,
although
sure.
we probably haven't seen them for some considerable time. So it's in a way it has acted over the years and still does to some extent as a parish church. So people want to get married here, or they want to have their babies baptised here. Now, so that we still have that happening within the town and beyond.
Yeah.
And the graves are just indicative of that.
The graves that we've got in our eye line here, it's one from 1956, 1953.
Yeah.
But at the front of the church, there's dates 17 this,
Yeah.
17 that.
Yeah.
We go back a long way,
Yes,
don't we?
yeah.
We are a Unitarian community supporting one another in our free religious faith. Worship in our beautiful chapel is the centre of congregational life. I mean, that's really a statement about the chapel today. But as we look at the building, it tells a different story, doesn't it? I'm just going to go up here so we can see the chandelier and the arch and the gargoyles. And let's go into the church. And then people can see. It's rather grand, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, and when you understand the kind of people who were worshipping here when this building was built and when it was extended, and we must remember that the porch was an extension on the building. That many of the main industrialists in this area were dissenters. And they worshipped here and in other Unitarian churches in the area. I'm not sure just whether they were, and certainly they don't now call themselves Unitarian actually, although they are part of the General Assembly. They were very powerful people in terms of employment, in terms of money. And so on, although this building was actually built again from money raised from sales of work and that kind of thing in the Victorian era. So
it wasn't a wealthy area because you've mentioned there was poverty,
absolutely.
But there were some very wealthy people in it.
The poor people went to Sunday school,
yeah,
and so there was very strong social difference between chapel people and Sunday school people,
yeah, sure.
Which was not resolved until my lifetime. When I came here 60 odd years ago, there was still a feeling of chapel people and Sunday school people.
People paid pew rent, didn't they?
Yes.
What was that all about?
Yeah. Well, I guess they felt that people ought to contribute to the building, and we also have to remember that the trustees were who were again the powerful people.
Yeah.
Were in charge. There wasn't an elected body that ran the place then. So. Paying your pew rent made sure that you had a place in the chapel, and people did or didn't or paid whatever the sum was, and again we didn't introduce a definite kind of membership subscription until my lifetime.
James Hawkes, why is he so important in the history of this chapel?
Well, he came to the chapel in 1800 or possibly just before. I think actually he was here probably as a student minister.
Oh, right.
Maybe, I don't know, but he was here just before he was appointed anyway. But by 1800, he had realised that the children, particularly in Dukinfield, were running wild and had no education at all. And he began a Sunday school. Now, the Sunday school was not just for religious education, which of course it was a major part of it.
There was a much bigger need, wasn't there?
Absolutely, with reading, writing, geography, I think, was included in the curriculum. So the children came on a Sunday. Obviously, many of them were working during the week, because this was the beginning of the big change in the area from a rural community to an industrial community, and so there were all sorts of changes going on socially as well as this.
So what century is this? What?
1800s.
The 1800s.
Yes, 1800s, early 1800s.
And
it's very early for a Sunday school, actually. In fact, I think David Dole once claimed that we were the first, but of course we weren't, because that was somebody else. But we were certainly a very early Sunday school, and so the congregation became the key mover in the community at that time for education.
I mean, the chapel seems to really got a bond with the local community.
Absolutely.
And Andrew and I were talking to a couple about a wedding the other week, and they said, "Oh, this is our family chapel," even though we'd never seen them.
Exactly.
On a Sunday, and that sense of connectedness. You mentioned geography there being included in the curriculum, and it made me think a lot of these kids probably hadn't been outside.
No.
And what's the furthest they'd have been?
A few miles.
Yeah, be lucky to go to Manchester.
Yes,
let alone
exactly. Probably
further afield.
Many of them would never have been to Manchester. No.
So they were getting a wider outlook on the world.
Yes,
when they came
they
here.
They were, and that developed both for children's education, and eventually became a day school, of course, and also adults' education as well, because many of the adults in the area couldn't read and write, and so adult education became part of what Old Chapel did.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the Sunday school and all the education around it became such a strong thing. Well, you gave me some memories to read from old members of the chapel who've since passed away. And one of them referred to a minister making efforts to try to integrate the Sunday school and the main chapel, because it had become such a dominant, such a big thing.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think, I can't remember the exact date at this minute, I'll have to look it up in a minute, but the teachers of the Sunday school wrote to the government when the government were going to allow there to be church schools. The teachers here, with the support of the minister, wrote to the government to say they didn't think that church schools were a good idea because they would include sectarianism.
Oh, right.
And so they wanted to stop that, and in fact they wouldn't allow, when we eventually had a Sunday school building and a Sunday school head teacher appointed, they wouldn't allow that head teacher to conduct worship at all in the school for fear of sectarianism.
I mean, let's not imagine that this chapel has always been Unitarian in the way that we would imagine. That's something that sort of emerged over time. So at the time we're talking about, when the Sunday school gets going, what were they being taught religiously?
Religiously, I think they were being taught the Bible, because the Bible was the thing, wasn't it? That was the reference. That was the whole, the starting point of the majority of people's religions was based in the Bible, and how you interpreted the Bible in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, the ministers here, looking at David Dole's book, they're all nonconformist in some way, but they seem very orthodox, some of them.
Sure, they were. I mean, you've only got to look around the building at the stained glass, for example. It's totally Christian.
Yeah.
No, it's not totally Christian. I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
There are examples, but exceptions rather. But the majority of the stained glass is Christian.
Who's this?
Oh, these three are the prophets of the Old Testament, and I can never remember which order that they're in. But
It says Isaiah,
yeah, and
Ezekiel.
yeah, and
Would that be Jeremiah?
it could be, yes.
Yeah, it says
it could
so
be,
there.
it must be, yes.
Well, three of its panels, the central three, were part of the second chapel, if you like, on this building, and the extra two were added when this west front was added in 1893. And also the roundels above were also put in at that time. So it's a most beautiful window, and it was made in France by Copronier. Who was a famous, apparently, no, I shouldn't say apparently, he was a famous stained glass window maker of that period. Maybe people didn't know about David and Jonathan, but they must have known about David and Jonathan, mustn't they? This window commemorates the men who fell in the First World War. So I suppose St George is a good symbol as the patron saint of England. But on either side of him are David and Jonathan, which is another story altogether.
Both warriors, but also symptomatic of how Unitarianism has developed, because many people have leaned into the story of David and Jonathan to explore whether there might be a more positive message about same-sex relationships in the Bible.
Exactly. I don't know whether the people who put these windows up thought about that at the time, but it's certainly come to fruition now, since we were one of the first churches in Thameside to conduct same-sex blessings and then same-sex marriages. And we've done quite a few now.
It's all Christian, but even within that, there's very orthodox Christian, and then there's more liberal, there's Arians, there's sort of Unitarian ideas.
Yes.
Coming out.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, as you said before, gradually over this what I call the Victorian period, which might overlap at both ends, there's this move towards Unitarianism, and eventually, of course, we were known as the Unitarians throughout the town, the Old Chapel Unitarians.
So that part of the identity, it wasn't there from the beginning. It came out of nonconformity, but it emerged.
Yes,
it emerged as Unitarianism was emerging.
One of the interesting strands of that is the changes in the hymn book, right? Because there were going back to, I think, the early 1900s, maybe a bit later. When was Martineau about?
Well, he was around in the early 1800s. I couldn't give you the exact dates.
Well, obviously his influence was gradually coming in, but at one point the committee here refused to accept a new hymn book that was based on his thinking. Sure. But the minister really wanted it and wrote to the council twice, asking could we have this new hymn book, but he didn't get it. No. Because obviously the people are the people are this chapel.
Yeah, sure.
Dawn, we've talked about quite a few ministers that have been here in Old Chapel's long history, but it's hard to think of anyone that's had more impact and is still remembered in the same way as Peter Short, who was here. When did he come to the chapel?
1965, and he was here for 10 years. He came here as a minister straight from college, and was, I think you'll find people describe him as a lovely young man, which indeed he was. And he came here with his wife, Susan, and he set out deliberately to bring the two sides of the congregation together, the chapel people and the Sunday school people together as one, called one family. And we get this notion of the family coming through, and people still talk about the Old Chapel family.
Yeah.
Although the following minister, David Dole, had reservations about that title, but despite that and the fact that he was here for 35 years, we still talk about one family, and that goes back to Peter's idea of mending the gap, of closing the gap between the chapel people and the Sunday school people.
Because the Sunday school was such a phenomenon
Yes.
in its own way,
Yes.
and he had the wisdom to see that needed bringing into the life of the church.
Yeah.
And he died a young man.
Yes, he did. I mean, people were absolutely, personally, I must say this, I was absolutely devastated by his death. Because he left Sue, obviously she was still a young woman, and two young children, and it was just incredibly sad. He had a terribly rampant cancer, and it took him very, very quickly.
He knew it was coming, and he did prepare
Yes.
the chapel. He
Yes.
spoke to the congregation about
He
it.
did.
And so here is this is all in tribute to Peter.
Yeah, the stone was brought from Derbyshire, because one of the places that Peter brought the congregation to was Hucklow, and he began weekends away with members of the congregation at the what became the Nightingale Centre at Hucklow, and so it seemed appropriate to mark his ministry with a stone from that area.
And only last night at the council meeting,
Yeah.
people were making suggestions of having a congregational visit
Yes.
to the Nightingale Centre,
Exactly. Yes.
and that all started with Peter Shaw.
Yes.
How many ministers here can you remember them? Come on, name the ministers you remember.
S.P. Whitehouse,
What?
Kenneth Wright,
When was this?
He was
Mr. Whitehouse, Robert Whitehouse was here when I was born.
Right.
He baptised me. So there was him, there was Kenneth Wright,
Right.
Peter Short, Vernon,
David first.
David first, David Dole, and Vernon Marshall, and Andrew.
And Andrew Parker,
Yes.
current minister. And out of all those ministers, they've all had an impact in some way, but Peter Shaw, well, a huge impact. What do you remember about Peter?
Or used to give us roastings. He was here when we were in our teens, growing up, and we used to have the YPL would meet on
What
a
does
Sunday.
YPL stand for?
Young People's League.
Okay.
So the UIPL, Unitarian Young People's League, would have meetings twice a week, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
One on a Sunday night. We came to chapel, and then from chapel we went across to Sunday school,
Yeah.
and we met in Sunday school. And Peter used to come across, and if we were caught having a drink or they were caught smoking around the back of the hot, he used to roast us, didn't he?
Yeah. I was on the receiving end of one of them.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Peter was quite a young minister, but you were
Yes.
younger than him.
Oh,
And that's
absolutely.
what matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was his stance on things. He didn't. He said he roasted you.
Yeah.
It was bizarre because he would talk to you normally but you knew
You've been told off.
you'd been told off, seriously told off. Because the one I always remember is we'd come out of chapel, I can't remember what we were doing, and we'd gone in the Astley next door. And we were only young teenagers at the time.
You were underage?
Well
yes.
underage. But being 6 foot something,
Yeah.
it was, you never questioned me.
Yeah.
So, Janet Saxon, all the crew were there, every member, but they were all sat down, and Janet and I were stood at the bar getting the drinks. And Peter passed the window, and Janet and I, because we knew he'd spotted us straight away. He was going down to Sunday school to open up for the youth club. So Janet and I knew we were in dead trouble, and everybody else was absolutely wetting themselves because they'd all been sat down, and Peter hadn't seen them. So Janet and I got a right good talking to.
What were you drinking?
Me, I was on pints, bitter.
So you got a talking to.
Yeah.
And were you fond of him then?
Peter, oh yeah,
Very
he was
much
brilliant.
so.
He was absolutely
It's
brilliant.
the worst thing, getting told off by someone that you like, isn't
I know, absolutely.
Well, I always remember we had trouble at the youth club one Sunday night. Some gentlemen, shall we say, came in. Door had been left open, and they came into the old building, and they were threatening people. And one of them drew a knife on Peter, and Peter just stood there and said, "Young man, would you mind? I'm the minister here. Put it away." And he did.
Wow.
You know, no agitation at all, no fear, and he just got these guys to back down, and they left.
He had a way with people.
Yeah,
he
must
really
have.
was a people person. You know, he managed to, he could relate to all ages. And of course, because he had 2 young children, he could relate to the youngsters in Sunday school.
Of course.
And it was through him that we came to use the term one family.
Yes. So the One Family initiative
Yeah.
is, because I'm learning that the Sunday school and other stuff going on was so successful that it was almost like growing a separate life.
It
Yeah.
was.
And he saw that he needed to bring everyone together.
Absolutely. And we've been fighting that fight for a long time.
And it's a phrase that people still use,
Yes,
one family.
one family. Yes, yeah.
Now, Peter came here in 1965,
Yeah.
and he was here until 1975. So what age were you while he was here?
I'd be 12
Was
when
he?
he arrived.
Yeah.
So you were here before him.
Yeah.
He comes as a 12-year-old in 1965, but his life was cut short
Yes.
Badly.
badly.
I always remember going up to see him at hospital. And, when they sent him home, and they basically told him he was going up to die.
Yeah.
But we were up at hospital with him at that time.
I missed that part of it because I was away at college at the time.
Right. You'd grown up with Peter.
Peter.
You'd gone from being a 12-year-old looking up to this guy, and your relationship with him would have changed as you become more
Yeah.
adult part of the
Yeah.
church. So how did you first find out that Peter wasn't well?
He went for tests.
He went
didn't
for, they'd been treating him for a stomach ulcer,
Yeah.
and it hadn't made any difference, and they sent him up for tests, and they whipped him into surgery, and
To do an exploratory, from what I
Exploratory.
remember.
they opened him up, and then they shut him up and said, "You've got 3 months."
And he came and told the church that.
He told us that, yeah.
What was the effect?
I think we were devastated at the time. It was
I
a
don't-
great part of our family,
Yeah,
as
I
it
don't
were.
think people could believe it really, that it could happen to somebody so young.
No.
And we felt as though he was making the right kind of impact on our congregation, and it was just cut short at the time when really it could have been brilliant.
Yeah, he could have been here many years, but this is how it worked out. Who took the service? Who was taking the services when he became ill? Did he continue to...
He continued originally to take services, and then it fell to your father.
Yeah,
And,
there were one or two in the congregation who took up the mantle of taking services. We had quite a few lay people who would prepared to take services. My dad was one of them, and Frank was another, like you said. Just to fill the pulpit.
And Peter had such an impact on the congregation over that period of time. There's what would you call it?
It wasn't just the congregation, it was the town.
Mm.
Right.
It was bizarre because not only did he have an impact on us, but all the other congregations would talk to him.
Mm.
Apparently at his funeral, every congregation in the town was represented, and people came from far and wide.
It was, the chapel was full. They were standing upstairs, they were standing around the outside of the chapel. We get 200, we reckon 250 now downstairs, and they were standing downstairs, and upstairs you were a similar number, and so it was absolutely packed out, the chapel.
Peter Hewis did the service.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just trying to remember who'd done the service, who actually came and took his funeral service.
You've had many ministers here, and some of them are marked in the graveyard, but it's only Peter that has, what do you call it? I wouldn't call it a shrine.
A memorial stone.
A memorial stone, yeah.
Yeah.
And did that happen soon after Peter's death?
When they decided that they were going to make the Garden of Remembrance in the back for people who wanted ashes scattering, they decided that it would... it was one of Peter's initiatives, I think.
I think at the
so
time.
I think they decided it would be a fitting memorial to have the stone. And of course, because he was brought up in Great Hucklow as well, as a boy.
He was a born Unitarian?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And he because he lived in the Peak District, they actually went to the quarry up the road from Great Hucklow, and had a piece of stone cut. And
that's what we have out there?
Yes, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I suppose it goes to show that we don't know how long we've got, we don't know what our impact is going to be, but here we are. He died in 1975, here we are in 2022, people are still talking about
Absolutely.
him.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
They had a huge impact on us.
Dawn, you were just saying that the other thing the chapel is known for in history is its music.
Yes, that's true. There's always been a very strong musical element in the chapel. In fact, we had a paid choir who sit up at the height of the organist, which is very high, and they used to lead the singing and also do solos and things like that. And there have been lots of organ recitals here, and we have the organ actually is a grade 2 star listed organ with the Organ Society of Great Britain, and we had it restored, within fairly recently to the early 2000s. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
How far back does it go?
1876. It was built by Alex Young, and it was enlarged again in 1896, courtesy of Elizabeth Coulson, whose relatives are buried in the yard. It's had 2 major overhauls. The last one was the big one, courtesy of Ian Peace.
When was that?
About 15 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
He did a lot of work getting the funding for it, which I'm still very grateful to that guy for that.
It's got a big sound, hasn't it?
Oh, it's got a fair sound, yeah.
Yeah.
It's 3 manuals.
Yeah.
Just over 2,000 pipes. Yes, it's a good organ.
How long have you been playing it?
37, 38 years.
So how many repairs have you seen it through?
Only one really.
Right, and could you tell the difference before and after?
Oh yes, yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was spent £80,000 on that. So yeah, there was a difference.
So when you started playing that organ, how long had it been there? So what year was it? It's all right, I'll edit that. 1984. Okay. So it had been there best part of 100 years when you started playing it. Are you aware of any of the organists who preceded you?
I knew Mr. Taylor.
What was he like?
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yes, very good musician.
Yeah.
He was also a headmaster at local school.
Yeah.
But yes.
But when you come here for the afternoon service, it's not your first service of the day, is it?
No, I'm playing Sailbridge in the morning.
Okay, so you're a major asset to the district.
Say that. I don't blow me on trumpet.
No, well, others will do it for you. Cheers.
I'm sure it says 22.
The 91st, is it then?
Was it before the Second World War?
Yes.
It's been the 92nd. Oh, should have
Because they
been.
had a break during the war.
Old Chapel's Arts and Crafts Festival has got such a magnificent history that, as you can see, we're actually having a bit of trouble remembering when exactly it started. It's been going that long. But Kevin and Bronwyn, you organise it now. Other people have organised it before you. First up, what happens? What is the Arts and Crafts Festival?
As we've said, it's been a Sunday school initiative that was created before the Second World War. We're on our 91st? Second,
with the gaps.
With gaps for the Second World War and a couple of gaps for COVID, unfortunately.
I came to the Sunday after the Arts and Crafts Festival when all the stuff was laid out. Tell me what happened. What did I miss the day before?
There are on-the-day events such as singing, recitation, choral verse, play reading, a variety of cookery, lots of on-the-day stuff. But there's lots of things that the children do and adults do previously. So there are entries for everything from knitting, crocheting, woodwork, craft, essay, poetry,
Photography.
art.
There was a scale model of the church. I saw.
Right.
That was you.
That was me, yes.
You got a first prize for that.
And there was a choral drama that became part of the Sunday service as well. So everyone in the congregation does something creative.
We try.
It's not just this chapel though, is it?
No.
So who else is involved?
It comes under the North Cheshire Sunday School Union, NC.
SF. It was an amalgamation of all the Sunday schools in the North Cheshire area. There are just a few of us remaining that actually take part. There are Stalybridge, Denton, Floweryfield and ourselves.
So it's all the churches in the district compete. So it happened to be at Old Chapel this year.
It's always
at Old Chapel.
Mainly only for logistics, because we're the only place that's big enough to host it now.
Right, okay. And can we try to agree on when this started? It was a long time ago.
Before the Second World War, definitely. 90
years. 90.
More, yeah.
95 years, say.
Yeah.
So.
It won't be far off our centre.
Wow. 2020 would make it 1930. So 1920s it would have started.
It's not an obvious thing that people think of. When they think of a chapel, they don't assume there's going to be something like this. Why? Why is an Arts and Crafts Festival part of the life of the chapel?
It's an integral part of the Sunday schools events. I mean, we're going back to the days when Sunday schools were absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
I mean, we remember going down to Hob Hill when they had their old Sunday school, which was a day school as well. And we were sat in their hall, and there were that many of us who were sitting on windowsills just to find seats. It was heaving. When we were at Sunday school, there must have been 20 of us in our class, and there must have been about 4 classes upstairs, all of equal number. So it's a throwback from that, really, when obviously in those days, even before our remembrances, the Sunday school was the centre of the social life, really, as well.
Wow.
It certainly
really is
became that. It was certainly the social events were massive. And I was remember having to set up the bottom room in the old building for whist drives, and then the youth club had to be very, very quiet on whist drive nights.
We weren't allowed down in the bottom corridors because we would disturb the people who were playing whist. But going back to the arts and crafts, though, I mean, it really was an annual event of events. You know, between all the a healthy competition between all the Sunday schools.
Right, so who won this year?
Staley Bridge, I know. We're on the warpath for next year.
And there was a dramatic society and there was a pantomime society, and they were 2 separate things. What's behind that?
Well, the dramatic society used to do a 3-act play in March and in October, and then the pantomime in those days used to be on over Christmas.
Okay, so what was there when you came here, Anne?
Well, the first thing I can remember is going with one of Bernard's aunts to the old school to a pantomime, Babes in the Wood.
Right, yeah.
And Bronwyn and Kevin were the babes. So that tells you how long ago that was.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
And I can remember that there was a dramatic society, but I can't remember what I went to see. I can't remember any of the plays.
But the 2 societies got merged.
No, I think they disbanded. Really.
Oh, they disbanded the dramatic
yes,
society.
Yes.
Pantomimes.
Yeah.
And there's a pantomime every year, and you've been doing this for 25 years.
In 2023.
Right, so what was this year's pantomime?
This year's was Dick Whittington.
Right, I'm going to test your memory. Year before, what was last year's?
Was that Cinderella?
Well, we didn't do one
Because of COVID?
Yes.
Yeah,
right,
and the year
okay.
before that, you were right, it was
Cinderella. Then?
I think it was Humpty Dumpty.
Yeah. Where did the cast come from? Are they all members of the chapel?
Not really, no, but they've all grown up within the chapel, or
Right.
they've all had children who came when we used to have a flourishing Sunday school.
Again and again it comes back to the Sunday school. Why was it so very dominant? It was meeting the educational and social needs of the community at a time when the state couldn't or wouldn't. When James Hawke started the Sunday school back in the 19th century, it mixed practical education with religious instruction. But at some point over the next century, the spiritual gave way to the practical. I spoke with Jean and Shirley, who remember attending Sunday school in the 1940s. They were absorbed in everything it had to offer, but they don't recall anything religious or spiritual about it. That was reserved for the Sunday service.
The gas had to be gas, and the number of times I broke the mantle because I would sort of reach up and...
That's only at the old Sunday school?
That's in the house.
Got you.
Well, you can see the building, can't you?
Mm.
Now that went straight back, so you can see it was on 3 floors. The ground, the first and the second.
It dominated the church, really. I mean, other people were telling me that Peter Short saw that he needed to try to integrate.
Yes, he did.
The church, and he called it one family.
Yeah, it was separate.
I always remember the ladies in their Sunday hats. They always had, ladies always wore hats, didn't they?
Everyone?
Everybody got dressed up for chapel. You had to wear your best clothes. Yeah, men always wore suits, and
Yeah.
It was always, yeah,
It
it was a day for dressing up.
yes.
Yeah.
And communion with other people, really.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. It was always a chatty place.
Yeah.
People came in and there was always people saying, catching up on news, and in fact I'm surprised they didn't go into Sunday school for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee after the service years ago, because they must have spent at least half an hour talking to one another, either before or after the service.
Yeah.
Cora and Nellie always sat on the back.
Tell me about them.
On the back row.
Cora and Nellie.
Cora married Norman Stevens, who was one of the big families in Old Chapel at the time. Norman was the bank manager here in Dukinfield, and always thought of them. If there could have been a lord and lady of the manor, they'd have been the couple.
And that's why they were on the back row.
She always sat at the back with a cousin, Nellie, who was a spinster. My dad and I and my mum and family used to sit in the back pew over there, purely and simply so that my dad could keep an eye on the porch. If he heard anybody, he could dash out.
Yeah.
But we used to sit there with Harry Schofield.
Harry Schofield and Enid.
And Enid, when she came.
Mother. Enid's mother.
Yeah. I don't remember Hilda so much as Uncle Harry.
Because we used to sit halfway down.
Yeah. Jean and Shirley and Richardson used to sit over here with Joyce Archer and Nora Saxon. Nora Saxon. She used to sit and she'd slide sideways during the service. She'd nod off. And we were all sort of ready to catch. But I mean, there was your mum and your auntie. They used to sit here.
Yeah.
And Lorna and cousins Lorna and Frank used to sit there, and Jean Mellor and her family used to sit here with Edie Teague and all those ladies and gents.
Now, Jean still sits?
She still sits on this
She still
side.
sits, so we're sort of halfway between the front and the back.
Yeah.
She's moved forward.
She's moved forward. Shirley's moved over from that side, and they sit together there now. But there was always the Hadfields and the Kenwithys, all big names in the family of Old Chapel.
Yeah.
They were the ones that sat on the chapel committee.
Right. So who sat near the front?
Generally the children, wasn't it, when we came?
When the
children used to sit at the front when we did afternoon services, because David used to have a box, didn't he?
Yes.
He introduced the idea of a part of the service, of the family service. He would get his box out, and in his box there'd be treasures. So all the children used to go and sit up at the front while they looked in his box.
So they'd be here because they'd be near to the minister. What year do you remember, the earliest year you remember here, sitting in this chapel?
I think probably when I was about 6 or 7, I would think, when I used to come to the morning services with my dad.
Yeah.
We had a liturgical service.
Right.
And I sat in these front pews.
Yeah.
And we used to go out with my brother. We were probably one of the only ones that came for the morning service. And just before the sermon, we used to go out into the vestry.
Well, you stayed in the vestry.
Yes.
Well, I always remember going out the back door.
Do you? We stayed in the vestry, waited for my dad.
Right, so you'd look around this chapel, how full would it be?
Morning service, quite reasonable.
I would say half to 3/4 full for the morning service.
What sort of people would you look out and see?
A lot of the older ladies.
Yes.
I mean, older when we were little.
Nothing changes really.
Yeah, older ladies and gentlemen really for the liturgical service.
We came partly for Sunday school because it counted as a mark in our Sunday school attendance at that point, and But I always remember we did the first part of the liturgical service and a hymn, and on the second day we went out.
Yeah.
It was literally that few...
The first part of the service we stayed in for.
We were in here less than about 20 minutes was a maximum.
Yeah. So they realised you could only take so much.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, we didn't get a sermon at that point.
No. And then we came back after lunch for Sunday school in the afternoon, which was in the Sunday school building. And then we came back here in the evening at 6:30 for an evening service.
I remember coming to the evening service once I started youth club.
Yeah, we used to sit upstairs in the gallery.
And what if you didn't want to go to the evening service?
We wouldn't have got our mark at Sunday school.
Right, tell me about this mark for Sunday school. Why did it matter?
Well,
But we used to get a prize.
Oh, right.
Prize Sunday. Prize distribution. We all got books.
the evening service didn't matter.
No.
The evening service didn't count. But you could get 104. If you attended 52 times in a year, you get 104 marks.
Yeah.
And
You were marked out of that.
as that, you were graded out of that. And you did buy your books. I don't think it really mattered when you were younger. You just bought your books, whatever attendance you'd done. But as you grew up, the attendance seemed to put some emphasis on the attendance. You got a better book. They always bought your book, and there's a label inside. We've got some. I've got one from my brother.
Yeah. I've got one from Hiram Tagg.
Yeah.
It's over 100 years old.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Wow. And it'll seem strange to any young people watching this, the idea that you have to go to church and you get these marks and then you get a prize. How did it seem to you at the time?
It was normal to us, wasn't it?
Yeah, we just grew into it.
Yeah. Even when our children grew up, they still got prizes. It's only in this last 12 months that they've stopped doing Prize Sunday.
Are you glad they made you go? Looking back now?
Looking back now, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't say I enjoyed the morning service. Sunday school was great.
Yeah.
In the afternoon, and I have to say the evening services, I got used to the evening services. We still attended in the morning, but as we got into teenage years, we sat through the service. The sermons were all right because Peter was taking them at that point when he was a teenager, and he was talking to us. Although you got this fixed service that you were running through, the sermon was Peter. And you think about it, Peter was doing 2 sermons and they were different sermons for every Sunday.
Basically.
Dawn was just saying that the 70s was sort of the peak after which things started to drop off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just saying, we're just talking about one family because I was talking about Stanstone Pinnacles.
Oh, yes.
It just struck me that was it. That was it, wasn't it? Really, the last 2
We
hours.
got married in 79.
Yeah.
And by that time, an awful lot of our age group had already left. Had gone. There were just 1 or 2 that got married.
There were 2 of us that left
Yeah.
because they all went to university and they never came back.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's a good point, that, Kevin. I hadn't thought about that. That it was that, wasn't it, where a lot of people who probably in the past weren't expected to go to university suddenly could.
Yeah.
And so they went.
They drifted off.
And I mean,
especially Gail and
I was going to say, Gail's a case in point, isn't she? She went the other side of the world, our daughter.
And the uptake from my age group, being at school, you went. I went straight into an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Because they existed, and later on they seemed to get rid of the apprenticeships. You went to university or college somewhere along the line, and I think that's where ours changed. Because as a local, I joined BT. I was put in North Manchester. My headquarters was Ashton. A lot of my peer group were doing the same. They went into apprenticeships. But when it came to your lot,
Yeah.
you're only 2 years difference, and university seemed to be the thing to go for.
Yeah.
Right, so it's Sunday afternoon, Sunday school in here with Christine and Anne. Tell me what happens.
2 o'clock on a Sunday. We all turn up, usually about 1:45.
Yeah,
And we have a sitting together time,
yeah.
light the chalice, and have a discussion. And
Discussion about what?
What they've done during the week,
Yeah.
if they've done anything what they like, if there's any birthdays.
Yeah.
And then we had a spell we were slowly trying to teach them the Lord's Prayer
Wow.
and to say that, and they
How did that
actually
go?
make it very good actually.
Yeah.
Yes, because it's changed times. We did it every day at school, didn't we? But
Oh, yeah,
our generation,
sure.
but not anymore.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So how many children are we talking?
Now or just
Now and then? I mean, it can vary, can't it?
Just say 10.
yeah.
About
What's the
10.
fewest? What's the most?
Fewest is 1.
Yeah. What happens when there's only one?
Well,
We still go ahead.
We still
Absolutely.
carry on.
Right.
We've got 4 teachers for 1 child.
Absolutely. So there's you two, and there's Emma, and there's Claire
Yeah.
as well. Great. And they stay in for the first part of the service.
Yes, they stay. They go on the first Sunday of the month
Yeah.
into the service and stay in for the first part and come out at the end of the second hymn.
Sure.
Unless it's a special service like the harvest or the
Yeah.
gift service next week, staying for the whole service.
Got you. But generally, that's not untypical, is it? I mean, I've been learning about the history of this church, and Sunday school was a massive thing. It was huge. It had men's classes, ladies' classes. People were learning. I mean, they weren't doing scripture learning. They were learning to read and write. They were
Yeah.
having geography lessons. So how come it's changed?
It's just a sign of the times. My father-in-law, he came to Old Chapel Sunday School, but he used to come 3 times on Sunday.
3 times,
Three
wow.
times.
I mean, what was Sunday school like when you first came here?
In here or in the old school?
In the old school?
Um,
Numbers? How many?
well, lots. We
Yeah.
used to have a massive hall upstairs and it used to be filled,
Dozens?
dozens.
Yeah.
From the primary up to the intermediate, then there were a ladies' class, a men's class, and there used to be like 3 directors sat on the stage then,
Yeah.
closing it.
Why do you think it was so popular then?
Well, there was no other entertainment then, was there? No,
And it was habit, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, it was
There was
tradition.
no Sunday opening.
yeah.
No Sunday football matches?
No.
No pubs on a Sunday.
No going out for the day in the car and everything. That was the life,
I mean,
wasn't
there was
it?
no TV.
No.
And so gradually you've had to adapt
Yeah.
to the bit of life.
Yeah.
So the mission of the Sunday school, in the past, it was showing them the world outside Dukinfield.
Yeah.
Because I read about that in the history, that one of the ministers started teaching geography because he thought children hadn't been too far, teaching them their math, spelling, reading and so on. You don't need to do that
No.
anymore. So you are concentrating on what?
Well, years ago, I can remember walking from the old Sunday school up to chapel, but I can't remember how many times we did that.
Yeah.
Now we do it, we take services, don't we?
Yeah.
So if we do harvest, we talk about harvest, Christmas, we do things for Christmas with Andrew. We do things for the boy, don't we? Then we do the arts and crafts. We do the,
We do an awful lot of moral issues.
Yeah.
Yes, so you've focused in on the spiritual, moral, emotional side of it, whereas in the past there were all these practical things that people needed that the Sunday school could offer. But I suppose it's just a sign of the times.
Yeah, it is.
Our times have changed.
But we feel we still have a lot to offer, and we are offering that side of it.
Absolutely.
to children.
And it's good to hear you say that, if one person turns up, we have 4 teachers ready to go.
Yeah.
We crack on. So what will you be doing this afternoon?
Well, this afternoon, we did Christmas cards last week for the magazine.
Yeah.
So they should be in this. It should be out
Yes.
today.
Yeah.
And we've been doing these.
All right.
These are going just to
Making things like is
Oh, right.
on the board.
Oh, lovely.
And that was with one child last week.
Oh, right.
COVID has become part of the history of every church. Every church and chapel, you ask what happened when COVID hit. How was it for you? So what happened at Old Chapel? Just talk me through that. What's the first thing you remember?
When the government asked everybody to go into lockdown, we immediately stopped all face-to-face services, and the majority of our congregation were in the vulnerable group.
Yeah.
So a lot of our congregation actually were behind closed doors for weeks and weeks.
So church is shut
Yes.
straight away.
Yes. All activities were ceased. A few of us took it upon ourselves to ring each other regularly, find out how people were doing. They wanted jobs doing, you know. But it was
Were people frightened?
very much so. Very
Yeah.
much so. It was a hard time. And keeping in contact with people wasn't easy. The telephone came into its own. I
Yeah,
have to say.
absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of phoning round.
Yes. Yeah.
And we were struggling, and somebody said, well, have we tried Zoom? This new thing's come out. And we were trying it out, as it were. We were trialling it for different things, and then suddenly it was a desperate need.
Yeah, I remember that. Word went round, and all of a sudden, from being something we'd never heard of, it
Yeah.
became the default
Absolutely.
thing that everyone was using.
Yeah.
But not everyone wanted to use Zoom.
No, because of the age of our congregation, Zoom,
Yeah.
of course, was something that really wasn't anything that we could make use of for our services. Andrew did agree to do a service for us on a sheet and produce a service on a sheet for us, which he photocopied and he delivered or posted out to our members each week.
He emailed us a copy, which
I uploaded to Facebook every week,
and
we
we printed some off as well.
Yeah, we had a real good take up on Facebook of people that were at least looking at it.
So not everyone was using Facebook at the beginning.
No, most of our congregation never used Facebook.
No.
Right.
Bromley keeps a page for chapel on Facebook,
Yeah.
but the people who go on it are not members of our congregation.
Or the younger end.
Oh, the younger end,
Yeah.
Emma and Claire.
COVID actually really devastated our congregation because some of our ladies just never came back. On the other hand, there were some ladies that were desperate to come back because they were lonely behind closed doors. They were desperate for that community again. So on the one hand, we lost one or two that have never really returned, but on the other hand, we had to hold them back. They were keen to.
So there were people that wanted to come to church and maybe a bit impatient to do so.
Yeah.
Were there any sort of, debates about can we open, should we open?
No, I think we waited until we were told that we could come back to services properly.
So everyone was looking to the government advice.
Yes.
That made the decision for you.
Yes.
Yeah, we did discuss it because we were still having meetings over Zoom.
Yes. We had our committee meetings over Zoom, and our trustees meetings were over Zoom.
Yeah.
So we kept up with the day-to-day business.
So Zoom came into its own for the administration of the church.
Yes.
It wasn't the thing for the Sunday service.
No.
It didn't. No. Our ladies they weren't on.
And that was meant to be the end of the film. But then I went to the Great Hucklow Carol concert with Unitarian College, and one of the other ministry students told me that she'd been talking to a lady who was a trustee at Old Chapel, Dukinfield. I introduced myself to this lady and asked her what years she'd been in Dukinfield. So, I said, you must remember Peter Short. He was my father, she said. Not only that, she lives not too far from me in Sheffield, and I'm going to visit her now.
The thing is that I think what my response to it was to become very driven.
Yeah.
And so I worked very hard in school. I tried to be good. I had my wobbles, didn't I? I was always trying to get good marks, and it wasn't that I was going to be a doctor right from that early stage. That came much later. But I was always trying to be better than it was possible to be. I was never quite good enough. And I wonder whether, in retrospect, I had harboured this feeling that maybe if I'd been a better daughter or a better person, that maybe this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, of course.
But the upshot of it was I worked very hard, and I got into medical school, and I actually realised in the long run that because I gravitated towards paediatrics. I did anaesthesia, but I gravitated towards paediatric anaesthesia.
Yeah.
And it's all about preventing children from suffering.
Yeah.
And I think that's what... I take a very psychological approach to my work as well, in that if I've got anxious children, I work very hard to make them feel confident and empowered and able to cope with what's happening to them, even though it's just that one day where they've got to face what could be the nasty doctor with the nasty needle, and in fact what turns into a bit of a game. I don't offer children a cannula in the back of their hand for their medicines, and I offer them a Spider-Man web shooter, or a deep sea diving mask or whatever. We try to make it as fun as it can be, even though it's a very serious process. And I think that's really what I've ended up dedicating my career to, is about trying to prevent children from suffering in whatever way.
Sometimes ministers' families have a fairly complicated relationship with the church and the community that they have to share the minister with.
Yes.
But it sounds like you had a pretty positive feeling about
most
the
of
local
the time.
community.
Most of the time.
Yeah, you've told some stories over the years.
When Judith was born, she was a very crotchety baby.
Yeah.
And I spent many an evening marching up and down the long hallway in the parsonage, saying, "You'd better be good to me when I'm old, after all this." Because Peter was out so much at night.
Yeah.
And you can see from that photo, I mean, he was besotted with both of them. But I was on my own a lot, at times when you really could do with another. It felt like, so being a single parent in one sense wasn't all that.
The few memories I have of life at the parsonage are of times when I wasn't at school. So I remember there was one time when I'd fallen over on the way home from school and hurt my elbow, and I had to stay at home. And I think I had a sling made out of an old university scarf, this pulley elbow. But my dad made that being at home fun.
Yeah, sure.
We would make things out of cardboard boxes. We had a whole puppet show made out of cardboard boxes.
Yes. I'd come home from work and there was this puppet show, and you'd done nursery rhymes and things for me.
Yeah,
and things,
I feel like I've got a bit of a creative streak, and I'm sure that's where it comes from.
Yeah, well,
he could make something out of anything.
Well, that's right. And the pantomimes, you'll have heard about the pantomimes. I remember him saying on one occasion, because Johnny Holland, who used to direct them, used to give Peter the jobs to do for the props. And I remember him saying, he was so lucky that he had a job where he could do things like this and call it work.
Yeah.
Then he died.
Yeah.
One Tuesday morning, and Mr. Kenworthy, from the funeral director, who came home from his holiday, because obviously Peter had worked quite a lot with his next in command, so he did a lot of funerals. And so the funeral was on the Friday, and I don't think I knew whether I was up or which way up I was. Yeah. But during that time, we'd had family come by rota. My parents came for a week. Alison and her then husband came for a week. And Peter's oldest brother and his wife, they live in Bakewell. Now they came for a week. The chapel secretary came, and it was all so quick from Tuesday to Friday, the funeral, about which hymns and so on. And, I hadn't really registered that I'd been thinking about it as our family loss. Not, you know, I hadn't realised, I don't think, until that point, just how much of an impact it made. And they wanted to know, and we had, you know, that melody of love.
Yeah.
And Peter was also chosen to be a pilgrim, one of the John Bunyan. I can't remember which version because there were a couple on there in the book. And Johnny eventually agreed to do the service because I knew I couldn't ask Peter Hewis. And so we were enveloped. And then there was a memorial service later, just a few weeks later. His father had been widowed by then. His mother had died. Peter's mother had died just 6 months earlier, and his father wasn't coping at all. But the other brother, the middle brother John, brought their father up for the memorial service. They'd obviously, you know, thought about things at the chapel committee or whatever, and they realised that we were going to have to move.
Yeah.
And that was awful because it was leaving him behind. It was running out on him. He died in our bedroom, in our bed. And looking at the cherry tree, which had just come into blossom, we moved the bed so that he could actually see the cherry tree from bed. And but there was a chap, you may not have come across the name, Norman Stevens, and his wife. They lived along the lane, and he was chapel treasurer.
All right.
And he was a bank manager, local bank manager, so he knew lots of people. And he knew of somebody in round the corner in Grenville Street who was moving. And he took me to look at this house, number 10 Grenville Street. And it was lovely. It was fine for the three of us. It was just
you stayed in Dukinfield.
We stayed in Dukinfield. Lot of discussion, and I turned it over in my mind, shall I go and join my parents who were in London? But I didn't, you know, it was a very sort of primeval feeling, I think, that I needed to be with the community. And I didn't want the disruption of Judith and Dan having to move school. Dan had just gone into full-time, you know, first year infants, whatever they call it now. And they got friends. You just joined Brownies, hadn't you? And you were having piano lessons. When we moved, we got the removal. This is one of the nice things, isn't it? We got the removal van at Parsonage. I mean, it was literally 2 minutes drive round the corner to where we were living. I mean, we lived in 3 houses in Dukinfield, and they've all been close together, haven't they? And the removal man said to me, "This is a lovely house. Why are you moving?" So I explained. And Dan was faffing around with something. He said, "How's the little lad taking it?" I said, "Very badly." So the next minute I knew you were in the cab of the removal van being driven round to our new home in Grenville Street by this lovely chap who was trying to do his best to...
that's sweet, isn't it?
Yeah, and then on the doorstep was Ian from next door, and my brother-in-law, I said about Janet, Peter's sister, her husband came up to help us move, so he and Ian did all the heavy lifting. And there they were waiting for us. I suppose one of the difficult things was, yes, we had to move, and that was very hard, but the bonus for which I've always been grateful was that we went to live at this number 10 Grenville Street, and the couple there, he'd been born there, she'd gone there as a bride, never lived anywhere else. They had 3 daughters, grown-up daughters by then, which is why they were moving, but they'd lost a son to leukemia. He'd died in the front room there in Grenville Street. And she said to me, "I never wanted to move, but I know he will be all right with you because you understand." And I said, "Yes, I will look after him."
Of course.
Basically.
Yeah.
And so that was, you know, yes, I understood it was different losing a partner and losing a child, but
yeah, sure.
She felt she could leave him in my tender care.
Yeah. What was it like living so close? Physically in proximity to the chapel?
Oh, it was fine because you know, he had his own entrance at the side. I loved that house, and it was far enough away so that not many. We had one room that was set up. We had a study. I mean, there were 3 big downstairs rooms, so we had one was his study, one was our sitting room, and the other one was a sort of dining room come interview room. So that people would come, wedding couples particularly, and but it wasn't. I don't recall it being a problem at all. It was
For us it was great because we had the parsonage garden and the whole chapel yard to play in.
and the cemetery.
Yeah.
I mean, we used to climb over the wall and go for walks in the cemetery when these two were very small.
It sounds pretty good.
It was. Yes, I don't think it's just rose-coloured spectacles looking in the past. I mean, I was very young. I was only 22 when we got married, and 25 when Madam here was born.
Yeah.
It was so, and I'd got plenty of resilience. I
People
suppose.
talk about the 1970s as a high point for Old Chapel.
Yes, I suppose that in a way that was.
You were the minister's wife, which is a certain identity, and you were a social worker, and you had those two things going on. And then you weren't a minister's wife.
Yeah.
And so what happened next in terms of who you are and what you do with your life?
Yeah, it wasn't, in a sense, it would have been far more difficult if I hadn't had my own job and my own recognition of my professional persona, if you like.
Yeah.
I remember you saying that we're not important anymore now Daddy's died.
Did I?
You did.
Yeah.
It was time to leave.
Yeah. I went away to medical school at 18 to Nottingham, and then never really ever lived back in Dukinfield. But as part of my anaesthetic training, I ended up in Sheffield, and I joined a choir and met Steve in the choir, and then we got married. And Steve is a born and bred Sheffield lad.
Yeah.
And so when I got my first consultant job in Leeds, we had to move away from Sheffield to be 10 miles from the hospital in Leeds. And I think Steve pined a bit for Sheffield.
Yeah.
But we had our two children living in Ossett in West Yorkshire, and were very. It was a privilege really that you were able to come over and do some.
I loved it. I stopped work. I had to take early retirement.
Come and do some childcare for us once a week and come over.
And, I had ME after viral encephalitis years before, and it left me with all these post-fatigue things. So when Ted was. You said, did I want to be a hands-on grandma? When you were expecting Ted? So I used to drive over on a Monday from Dukinfield to Ossett to look after Ted while you and Steve came back to Sheffield to sing in the choir that you'd met in.
That's right. Yeah.
Is that right?
So we carried on singing in that choir, kept our connections with Sheffield, and then this job came up at Sheffield Children's Hospital.
No, you're allowed to cross the Pennines. It is allowed. I did it. And
there's less rain this side.
Well, it's probably, I have seen for myself at Old Chapel how Peter Short is still part of their life.
Well, isn't that lovely to know?
It is, isn't it?
How much and in what way is he still part of your life?
Oh, enormous amount. I mean, he's not forgotten. It's like Judith said. I mean, I thought I would never get over it, but you learn to live with it. But there's that loss. That sense of absence is Alan Davis.
He said the presence of absence.
The presence of absence is so, and this is where we've been so lucky with Paul, because he's never tried to compete, has he?
No, I mean, and what was somebody said to you that you've been able to demonstrate that it's possible to love two men at the same time?
Oh, that was Tom. I love a colleague of mine who I was talking about HIV and AIDS. He came to work with us in the Staff Development Centre, the department in Manchester. He's gay, and his partner had died of AIDS, and he said to me sometime afterwards, he told me about Robert, I told him about Peter, and he said I had taught him that it was possible to love somebody who was dead but still be able to love somebody who's alive.
That's amazing.
He has another partner now, and they
and that you're not
being disloyal.
Yes, that's the thing, isn't it? You're not denying the existence of the other person or trying to forget them or being disloyal. You're embracing both relationships.
Yes, and I always said that when I'm an old woman in hospital, in my early days, sort of seeing old ladies in hospital who needed home helps before they could go home, and I said if anybody comes to me like that, I'll be able to say that I've had two good husbands.
Yeah.
and life has had its sadness and its challenges, but it sounds like it has been sweet as well in the years since Peter died.
Yeah, especially with...
yeah. And how does it feel to be remembering those days in Dukinfield?
It's lovely. It's
Yeah.
really nice to know that, you know, you've picked up this sort
It's
of
palpable.
atmosphere, feeling, whatever you want,
You couldn't
ambience,
miss
whatever
it.
you want to call it. But because I was sort of, as all the older people are dying off, like Ron and Kev's parents and so on, who knew him and all that, I thought there'll be nobody left who remembers him. But it was time for me to move away.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to speak into the camera here.
Yeah.
What I'd like the Old Chapel people to know is that it was a fine community to grow up in.
So
They really looked after us.
They did. They looked after us.